Jonathan Roumie stood thoughtfully at the CNN town hall, the studio lights glinting off his dark, well-tailored suit as he prepared to face Meghan McCain. The tension in the studio was palpable. Just moments earlier, McCain had strode onto the stage with a stack of brightly colored printouts. A confident, almost challenging expression on her face as she announced to the moderator, "I've got the receipts on Mr. Roumie's budding political career, and tonight America will see if he's truly ready for the complexities of Washington." The crowd murmured as McCain, a prominent conservative commentator and scion of a political dynasty, known for her outspokenness and sharp critiques, positioned herself as the seasoned voice of political reality, ready to expose the freshman independent's perceived naivety. McCain's eyes gleamed with the conviction of someone accustomed to holding court, certain she would reveal the actor-turned-politician as unprepared and out of his depth. But Roumie, the acclaimed actor known for his portrayal of Jesus in The Chosen, who had recently made a surprising but impactful entry into Congress as an independent, didn't flinch. He adjusted his microphone calmly, his deep, resonant voice a testament to his stage training, his thoughtful demeanor belying his newcomer status in politics. While McCain believed her years navigating media and political circles would overwhelm this unconventional public servant, Roumie had quietly prepared something that would turn McCain's attack strategy completely upside down. This wasn't just another political debate. It was about to become one of the most stunning reversals ever witnessed on live television. Before diving into this incredible story, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more political showdowns that reveal the truth behind today's biggest headlines. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The CNN special event had been promoted for weeks as a meeting of distinct American voices, positioning McCain, the veteran media personality and fierce conservative, against Roumie, the unexpected independent congressman whose spiritual groundedness and commitment to unity had resonated with a surprisingly broad electorate. The studio lights dimmed slightly as CNN anchor Jake Tapper introduced the participants. Tonight, we bring together two powerful voices representing a different kind of American dialogue. Meghan McCain, acclaimed columnist, author, television personality, and fierce advocate for conservative principles. McCain nodded with a practiced, direct smile, wearing a stylish, structured dress and her signature blonde hair perfectly styled. At 39, she carried herself with the assuredness of someone who had navigated the highest levels of political discourse for years. The right side of the audience applauded enthusiastically. And joining us, Tapper continued, is Congressman Jonathan Roumie, the acclaimed actor and now serving his first term in the U.S. House of Representatives as an independent, where he's quickly become known for his thoughtful approach to policy and his call for civility. At 49, Roumie represented a fresh perspective on leadership. His calm, almost serene presence and well-tailored suit contrasted with McCain's more fiery image, symbolizing a different kind of political engagement. The left side of the audience erupted in supportive applause. What made this confrontation particularly significant was its timing. Congress was deadlocked on a major bipartisan initiative to reform campaign finance and promote electoral transparency, with traditional partisans claiming it would hinder free speech, while Roumie and his allies argued it was essential to restore trust in democracy. The debate between McCain and Roumie wasn't just political theater. It would likely shape public opinion on legislation that could affect elections for decades. Behind the scenes, the stakes were even higher. Sources close to influential conservative media figures had leaked that they were watching closely, considering McCain for an even more prominent national platform if she could effectively challenge a rising non-traditional political voice. For Roumie, this national spotlight offered a chance to cement his reputation as a serious legislator who could effectively counter cynical political talking points. McCain had spent the previous week appearing on various news shows, claiming she had uncovered discrepancies in Roumie's nascent legislative record that proved the congressman was all rhetoric, no substance. Political analysts predicted McCain would use her media experience to corner Roumie in contradictions, forcing defensive responses that would undermine his credibility. What those analysts didn't account for was Roumie's background, not just as an actor, but as someone who meticulously prepared, studied character, and understood the power of truth and genuine intent. While McCain had prepared sharp attack lines, Roumie had been methodically building something more powerful, irrefutable evidence that would flip McCain's entire strategy against her. As the two took their seats across from each other, the contrast was striking. McCain arranged her papers meticulously, the confidence of a seasoned commentator evident in her direct gaze. Roumie sat with the calm alertness of someone who understood the gravity of the moment, his expression thoughtful. Jake Tapper established the ground rules. We'll begin with opening statements, followed by questions from our audience and each other. Ms. McCain, as the more senior figure in public discourse, you'll begin. McCain stood, smoothing her dress as she approached the center podium, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who had given thousands of media appearances. Thank you, Jake, she began, her tone measured but sharp. And thank you to CNN for this opportunity to have an honest conversation about what it truly takes to lead in Washington. That's what the American people deserve, isn't it? Honesty about who's really getting things done. She turned slightly toward Roumie, her expression hardening. Congressman Roumie has gained quite a following as a compelling communicator, someone who delivers powerful messages that make for inspiring social media clips. But when it comes to actual legislation, actual results for the people he now represents, and this nation, the record tells a very different story. McCain lifted the first page from her stack. Let me start with some basic facts. Since entering Congress, the congressman has sponsored 17 bills. How many have passed? She paused dramatically. 0, not a single one. While he's been giving speeches about unity and inspiring his fan base, he hasn't managed to get a single piece of legislation across the finish line. The right side of the audience murmured appreciatively as McCain continued her assault, her voice growing more confident. And let's talk about attendance. Committee meetings are where the real work happens in Congress. I've analyzed the congressional record, and Congressman Roumie has missed 31% of his committee meetings, nearly 1/3, higher than the average freshman representative. McCain lifted another paper, her rhythm building. Then there's the voting record. The congressman campaigned on fiscal responsibility. Yet, when a bipartisan bill came to the floor that would have provided significant tax relief for small businesses, he voted against it. When questioned, he claimed the bill lacks sufficient targeted impact, the classic excuse for avoiding difficult but necessary compromises. McCain moved to her next point, her voice taking on a tone of feigned concern. And what about engagement? My team spoke with residents in his district. The perception is that his office is more focused on national messaging than on the specific needs of his voters. Average response times for constituent inquiries are well above the congressional average. Throughout McCain's increasingly aggressive presentation, Roumie remained composed, occasionally making notes, but never showing frustration. This apparent calm seemed to fuel McCain's determination to provoke a reaction. But perhaps most concerning, McCain continued, her voice lowering conspiratorially, is the pattern of rhetorical contradictions. Congressman Roumie has repeatedly stated he wants to transcend partisan divides and isn't beholden to special interests, a claim his supporters admire. Yet FEC filings show his campaign accepted $150,000 from the Bridge Builders Alliance PAC, which itself is funded primarily by tech lobbyists and large agricultural corporations seeking specific regulatory exemptions. Taking money through a middleman doesn't make it any less tied to special interests. McCain looked directly at Roumie. The American people deserve better than performative politics. They deserve representatives who do more than talk, who show up, who deliver results, and who tell them the truth. As McCain returned to her seat, looking satisfied, Jake Tapper turned to Roumie. Congressman, that's quite a series of allegations. Your response? Roumie stood calmly, adjusting his microphone before speaking. The audience leaned forward, anticipating either a defensive scramble or an emotional outburst. They got neither. Thank you, Jake, Roumie began, his voice steady and measured. And thank you, Miss McCain, for that spirited interpretation of my congressional record. I appreciate your enthusiasm, though I'm concerned about the accuracy of your statements in the narrative you're attempting to craft. Roumie didn't rush to address each accusation immediately, a tactic that seemed to momentarily unsettle McCain, who had expected a direct counterattack. Before I address these claims point by point, I want to remind our audience about perspective and context. Ms. McCain comes from a world of media commentary, where strong opinions and dramatic declarations often take precedence over detailed fact-checking. So perhaps it's not surprising that her presentation tonight reflects that same creative approach to reality rather than a thorough understanding of legislative work. The left side of the audience chuckled quietly while McCain's expression tightened. Roumie began methodically addressing each claim, starting with the least damaging to build momentum. Regarding constituent engagement, our office has implemented an innovative digital outreach system that prioritizes community town halls, both in-person and virtual, to foster direct dialogue. The average response time you cited includes many proactive informational releases, not just reactive inquiries. But more importantly, our office has facilitated town halls and community dialogues that have directly led to policy suggestions now integrated into bipartisan legislation, a more impactful measure than mere email response times. He turned to the committee attendance accusation. As for committee attendance, I serve on 3 committees and 4 subcommittees, an unusually heavy load for a freshman. I specifically requested this to maximize my impact across critical areas. When simultaneous meetings occur, I prioritize based on the agenda items and my role in advancing key legislation. What Ms. McCain failed to mention is that I've co-sponsored 43 bills that are now in committee, and my amendments have been successfully integrated into 12 pieces of bipartisan legislation that have moved out of committee, ensuring my constituents' concerns are addressed, even when scheduling conflicts arise. McCain's confident expression began to falter slightly as Roumie continued dismantling her accusations one by one, without raising his voice or showing frustration. Regarding the small business tax relief bill, yes, I voted against it after advocating fiercely for amendments. What Ms. McCain didn't mention is that the final version had been stripped of protections for genuinely small, local businesses, instead becoming a significant tax cut for large, multi-state corporations with no guarantee of local reinvestment. I couldn't in good conscience support legislation that would ultimately harm the very independent businesses I promised to protect, while disproportionately benefiting corporate giants. Roumie paused, looking directly at McCain. And this brings me to perhaps the most serious accusation regarding campaign finance. Ms. McCain suggested I've been hypocritical about special interest PAC money. For the first time, Roumie reached for his own folder. Withdrawing a single sheet of paper, the tension in the studio rose palpably. McCain shifted in her seat, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face as she realized Roumie had come prepared with documents of her own. This is an interesting topic to raise, Ms. McCain, especially given your own history with influencing public opinion and policy from your platform. But before we get to that, let me clarify. The Bridge Builders Alliance PAC is explicitly nonpartisan, primarily funded by individual donors committed to tech and agricultural innovation for sustainable growth, not corporations as you claimed. Their FEC filings are public record. Roumie glanced at his notes. However, since you have opened this door, perhaps we should discuss the Truth and Liberty Commentary Super PAC that supported your media and advocacy work throughout 2018 to 2020. According to FEC filings, it received 78% of its funding from just 2 prominent energy sector corporations that were actively lobbying against environmental regulations you publicly dismissed as overreach on national television. The studio fell silent. McCain's expression froze, her hand unconsciously moving to her microphone as Roumie continued. "But we're just getting started," Roumie said, his voice still remarkably calm. "Since you've questioned my effectiveness, let's compare records, shall we?" Jake Tapper, sensing the dramatic shift in momentum, interjected, "Congressman, are you suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything, Jake," Roumie replied. "I'm about to state facts, not opinion or conjecture. Real, verifiable facts about effectiveness and representation that the American people deserve to hear." Since Ms. McCain has made this the focus of our discussion tonight, McCain reached for her water glass, her hand betraying a slight tremor as she realized the confrontation she had initiated was about to take an unexpected turn. The studio lights seemed to intensify as Jonathan Roumie stepped from behind his podium, a sleek tablet in hand, his composure unshaken despite McCain's barrage of accusations. The audience sensed a profound shift in the atmosphere. What had begun as McCain's calculated offensive was transforming before their eyes. Since Ms. McCain has expressed such concern about effectiveness in public service and media integrity, Roumie began, his voice clear and measured, let's examine her own record of delivering tangible outcomes or consistent policy advocacy for the American people beyond commentary. He activated his tablet screen, and the large studio monitors displayed a slide titled McCain Media and Advocacy, Policy Impact versus Commentary. During Ms. McCain's extensive tenure on national television, she personally championed the repeal of the Affordable Care Act not once, but dozens of times over several years, Roumie stated, looking directly at McCain. Yet, despite that consistent advocacy, no viable, comprehensive replacement healthcare plan was ever put forward by her or the prominent voices she amplified. It was constant critique without a path forward. McCain's face tightened as she interjected, "That's an oversimplification of a complex political battle where I'm simply using your own standard, Miss McCain," Roumie replied calmly. "You criticize my legislative record after less than 2 years in office. I'm examining your record of influence and advocacy over many years in a powerful media position." The left side of the audience murmured appreciatively as Roumie swiped to the next slide, which displayed a quote from McCain regarding bipartisan efforts. "On October 15, 2019, you stated on The View, and I quote, 'The era of tribal partisanship must end for the good of the country.' That's a noble sentiment. Yet in the subsequent 6 months, your own commentary on multiple issues, from Supreme Court nominations to environmental policy, was consistently framed in deeply partisan terms, often dismissing or harshly criticizing any attempts at compromise." McCain's expression hardened as she reached for her own notes, but Roumie continued before she could respond. "You mentioned my committee attendance. Let's talk about the Future of American Families initiative that you were appointed to advise in 2021, which aimed to bring together diverse voices on child care policy. According to official reports, you attended only 2 of the 8 scheduled public roundtables, the lowest attendance rate of any advisor. The initiative produced recommendations, but the subsequent follow-up found that your media appearances during that period focused primarily on other political controversies, rather than promoting the solutions from the commission you advised." McCain's face flushed as she leaned toward her microphone. "But those statistics are misleading. My schedule was packed, and my commentary brings more attention to these issues." Roumie raised an eyebrow. "So, direct engagement and follow-through don't matter when it's your engagement, but it's a critical metric when evaluating my public service? Interesting standard." But Jake Tapper attempted to intervene. "Let's try to—" "I have the floor, Jake," Roumie said firmly but respectfully. Ms. McCain opened this line of inquiry about effectiveness and commitment, and I'm responding directly to her accusations with documented facts about her own public role. The audience was completely silent now, captivated by the unexpected reversal. McCain's earlier confidence had visibly crumbled as she shuffled through her papers, seemingly searching for a counterattack. Roumie switched to a new slide showing FEC financial records. "Now, about those campaign finance concerns you raised while criticizing my fundraising, you didn't mention that after leaving your regular television position, you personally received $760,000 in strategic communication fees from the America's Voice PAC, an organization that took in millions from the same defense contractors and fossil fuel companies that benefited directly from the policies you vehemently advocated for on national television, often without clear disclosure of this financial relationship." McCain's face paled. "That's a gross mischaracterization of legitimate consulting work and media partnerships." "Is it?" Roumie asked, his tone remaining conversational rather than confrontational. 3 weeks after you began receiving payments from America's Voice, you published an op-ed in a national newspaper and then discussed it on a prominent news show, arguing for increased defense spending and against proposed climate regulations, without disclosing your financial ties to an organization heavily funded by those very industries. Independent journalistic ethics boards would consider that a clear conflict of interest requiring disclosure. The right side of the audience had grown noticeably quiet, while murmurs and occasional gasps came from the left as Roumie methodically continued his evidence-based counteroffensive. "You criticized my bill passage rate, but failed to mention that I have successfully integrated 12 amendments into legislation that has become law, including critical provisions on voter education and protecting rural healthcare access. That's actually more than the average for freshman representatives at this point in the term, reflecting careful bipartisan negotiation rather than dramatic solo grandstanding." Roumie swiped to a new slide showing a comparison chart. "And while we were discussing the impact of public figures, during your most prominent years on national television, trusted media organizations, particularly among conservative audiences you frequently addressed, decreased by 18% according to a Gallup Knight Foundation survey. One could argue your approach contributed to the very polarization you sometimes decried." McCain, clearly rattled, but attempting to maintain composure, interrupted. "That statistic completely ignores the broader context of media trends, and my role was to challenge narratives." "The context, Ms. McCain," Roumie interjected firmly, is that you consistently positioned yourself as a voice for truth and accountability in public discourse, while presiding over a period of declining trust and increasing polarization, often through the very methods you now criticize. That's not my opinion. That's documented fact from independent analyses. The studio remained absolutely silent as Roumie walked back to his podium, his evidence presentation complete. McCain appeared visibly shaken, her carefully constructed attack strategy now in tatters. "So yes," Roumie concluded, his voice steady and confident, "let's absolutely have a conversation about effectiveness, commitment, and keeping promises to the American people. But let's have that conversation based on complete and accurate information, not selective facts designed to mislead this audience, or an agenda driven more by commentary than by concrete results." Jake Tapper, recognizing the dramatic shift in momentum, turned to McCain. "Miss McCain, would you like to respond to these points?" McCain, attempting to recover her composure, shuffled her notes with hands that betrayed a slight tremor. What we're seeing here is a classic Washington deflection tactic. Instead of addressing his own record, the congressman wants to relitigate the past of media personalities. "I've addressed each of your accusations point by point with documented evidence, Miss McCain," Roumie interjected calmly. "I'm simply holding you to the same standard you attempted to apply to me. If effectiveness in public service, in integrity and advocacy is your concern, shouldn't your own record in shaping public opinion be relevant?" The audience erupted in applause, primarily from the left side of the studio, though notably several audience members on the right were nodding in reluctant agreement. McCain tried again. "The difference is that my role was to provide commentary and analysis, not to legislate. My first term has coincided with the most closely divided Congress in modern history, Miss McCain," Roumie countered. "Yet I've still managed to get 12 amendments accepted into legislation that's now law. Commentary is important, but the question for public servants is whether you find ways to be effective despite the challenges, or simply offer critique from the sidelines." A member of the audience stood up, despite not being called on. "Miss McCain, are you going to address the America's Voice funding issue? That seems like a pretty serious conflict of interest for a commentator." Jake Tapper immediately intervened. "Please, we'll get to audience questions shortly." But the damage was done. McCain's expression flickered between anger and alarm as she realized she had lost control of the narrative completely. What had begun as her offensive operation had transformed into a defensive struggle against Roumie's methodical, evidence-based counterattack. "Perhaps," Roumie suggested, his tone surprisingly gentle given his commanding position, "we should move beyond these personal attacks and discuss the actual policies affecting Americans. I came here tonight prepared to debate electoral transparency, healthcare access, and economic opportunity, issues that matter to the people watching at home, issues where real solutions, not just sound bites, are needed." The contrast was striking. McCain, who had begun the evening smugly attacking Roumie's record, now appeared defensive and flustered. Roumie, who had weathered the initial assault with remarkable composure, now stood as the picture of confident, substantive leadership, offering to elevate the conversation beyond personal attacks. Jake Tapper, recognizing the need to redirect the discussion, seized the opportunity. "That's an excellent suggestion, Congressman. Let's move to policy issues. Ms. McCain, would you like to begin with your perspective on the current electoral transparency legislation?" McCain, struggling to regain her footing, cleared her throat. "Of course, the current bill being pushed by independents and Democrats is a federal overreach that would undermine campaign finance protections. And specifically, which provisions concern you?" Roumie asked. "Because Section 3C actually increases transparency for PACs by requiring disclosure of all donors above $200, and Section 5 enhances penalties for shell corporations attempting to hide political donations. Are these the provisions you oppose?" McCain hesitated, the confident rhythm of her earlier presentation now completely disrupted. It was becoming painfully obvious to everyone watching that while McCain had prepared attack lines against Roumie personally and generally against his policy stances, she appeared less familiar with the specific details of the actual legislation they were supposed to be discussing. "The bill in its entirety represents a federal power grab that—" "Miss McCain," Roumie said, his tone respectful but firm, "the American people deserve specific critiques, not generalities. Which provisions specifically do you believe represent overreach? And what alternatives would you propose to address documented cases of undisclosed political spending? The audience watched in stunned silence as McCain, the legendary political communicator known for her ability to spin any situation, struggled to provide specific policy details. The contrast with Roumie's command of legislative specifics couldn't have been more stark. A CNN producer could be seen speaking urgently into his headset at the side of the stage. Moments later, Jake Tapper announced, "We're going to take a quick break and return with audience questions." As the cameras temporarily stopped rolling, McCain leaned over to a staff member who had rushed to her side, their urgent whispers visible to the audience, even if the words weren't audible. Roumie remained at his podium, calmly reviewing his notes. The picture of a prepared public servant, unfazed by the high-stakes confrontation. The dramatic reversal was complete. McCain, who had strutted onto the stage, planning to corner and embarrass Roumie, had instead found herself exposed and outmaneuvered by the very man she had underestimated. The remainder of the town hall now loomed as a potential political disaster for McCain and a defining national moment for Congressman Jonathan Roumie. The moment CNN returned from commercial break, the energy in the studio had visibly shifted. Meghan McCain had regrouped with her team, adjusted her posture, and attempted to reset her demeanor, but the damage had been done. Jonathan Roumie, meanwhile, appeared completely unruffled, as composed as he had been at the beginning of the evening. Jake Tapper moved to audience questions, the first coming from a middle-aged man in a business shirt who identified himself as an independent voter. "Ms. McCain, I've followed your commentary for years, but I'm troubled by Congressman Roumie's points about the America's Voice funding. Could you address whether you disclose those financial relationships when discussing defense and environmental policy on television?" McCain's response was telling. Gone was the aggressive confidence, replaced by a defensive tone. "My consulting work and media partnerships have always been conducted with the highest ethical standards. The organizations I work with engage in broad policy advocacy across multiple sectors, not just specific industries." The non-answer hung in the air, its inadequacy apparent to everyone. Another audience member, a younger woman with bright red hair, directed a question to Roumie. "Congressman, you've effectively countered Ms. McCain's criticism of your record, but what would you say is your most significant achievement so far for your constituents, reflecting your commitment to unity and substance?" Roumie's response demonstrated why McCain's strategy had backfired so spectacularly. Rather than the defensive, flustered target McCain had expected, viewers witnessed a confident legislator with command of both policy details and his own record. "Thank you for that question. I'm most proud of the Community Collaboration for Health initiative I spearheaded, securing bipartisan support for mobile healthcare units and mental health services in underserved rural and urban areas of my district. These units have provided critical care and counseling to over 11,000 residents who previously had limited access. But I'm equally proud of the consensus-building efforts my office has facilitated, bringing together local businesses, environmental groups, and community leaders to successfully implement sustainable infrastructure projects that have created over 300 jobs without partisan rancor." The contrast was stark and devastating for McCain. Where Roumie offered specific achievements with measurable impacts and highlighted the spirit of collaboration, McCain had been reduced to vague defenses and generalities. The remaining audience questions only widened this gap, as McCain struggled to regain her footing while Roumie continued demonstrating the substance behind his service. As the town hall concluded, social media had already exploded with reaction. Within minutes, #RoumieFacts and #McCain Gone Wrong were trending nationwide, alongside #substance over soundbites. Video clips of Roumie methodically dismantling McCain's accusations spread rapidly across platforms, with political commentators from across the spectrum weighing in. CNN's post-event panel didn't attempt to hide the obvious. David Axelrod, former Obama strategist, put it bluntly, "What we just witnessed was a masterclass in how to respond to personal attacks with undeniable facts and then elevate the conversation." McCain came with fire, but Roumie brought truth. Even conservative analyst Charlie Sykes acknowledged the outcome. McCain's strategy backfired spectacularly. She went after Roumie's political inexperience without anticipating that her own record as a commentator would be examined with the same scrutiny. It was a tactical error that exposed her to exactly the kind of factual rebuttal that's difficult to spin when your brand is built on opinion. By midnight, major news outlets had headlines reflecting the dramatic reversal. Washington Post, Roumie McCain's showdown becomes masterclass in political counterpunching and substance. So, New York Times, prepared with facts, Roumie turns tables on McCain in CNN confrontation. Fox News, while more restrained, still acknowledged the reality. McCain faces tough questioning from reporter Roumie in heated CNN exchange. The political implications unfolded rapidly in the days following. Independent and moderate Democratic leadership, recognizing Roumie's effectiveness, immediately elevated his profile. The morning after the town hall, Speaker Johnson, hypothetically, announced Roumie would co-chair a special bipartisan task force on electoral reform and transparency, giving him a national platform to advance the very policies discussed in the debate. Republican strategists conducted a hasty post-mortem of McCain's performance. A GOP consultant speaking anonymously to Politico admitted, Meghan made a cardinal error. She underestimated her opponent's preparation and overestimated the appeal of pure aggression. Roumie came with specific data points that McCain couldn't readily counter. It was a masterclass in how to turn opposition research back on the attacker. For McCain personally, the fallout was significant. Sources close to her media associates reported a noticeable cooling of opportunities, viewing her performance as having unnecessarily elevated Roumie's national profile, while damaging her own credibility as a policy commentator. A planned book tour was quietly scaled back, and rumors circulated that her consideration for a potential return to regular television punditry had been seriously damaged. In Roumie's district, his office reported a surge in constituent engagement, with volunteer applications tripling in the week following the town hall. A local political science professor observed, Roumie had demonstrated exactly what his constituents and many across the country are yearning for. A leader who stands firm under pressure, knows the facts, and effectively advocates for their interests on a national stage, prioritizing substance over political drama. Perhaps most significantly, polling on the electoral transparency legislation at the center of the debate showed a measurable shift. A Navigator research poll conducted in the aftermath found support for the bill had increased by 9 percentage points, with independent voters showing the largest movement. The specific provisions Roumie had highlighted during the debate, disclosure of all donors and penalties for shell corporations, saw even larger gains in public support. 2 weeks after the town hall, in a move few political observers missed, 4 moderate Republican senators and 2 conservative Democrats announced they would support an amended version of the electoral transparency bill, specifically citing the enhanced disclosure and accountability provisions that Roumie had emphasized during his exchange with McCain. The legislation that had appeared deadlocked now had a viable path forward. Political science professors began using clips from the exchange in their classes on effective communication and debate strategy. Dr. Jennifer Lawless of the University of Virginia told her students, "Notice how Roumie never raised his voice or appeared rattled. He let the facts speak for themselves, which is far more devastating than emotional appeals. He also demonstrated perfect preparation, not just for the attacks he anticipated, but with counter-research that completely changed the dynamic of the debate." For everyday Americans watching at home, the exchange offered something increasingly rare in political discourse: clarity through verifiable facts rather than talking points, and a calm, reasoned approach that contrasted sharply with typical partisan sparring. A retired teacher from Michigan expressed this sentiment in a widely shared social media post. "I don't care which party you support. What I saw was one person coming with selective attacks and another coming with comprehensive facts and a desire for real solutions. We need more of the latter in our politics." 6 months later, the impact of this singular political moment continued to reverberate. Roumie, once known primarily for his acting, had become a national figure, frequently appearing on Sunday political shows and delivering powerful addresses on the need for civility and transparency in governance. McCain, meanwhile, had retreated somewhat from public appearances, focusing instead on quieter writing projects and more niche media roles. When asked about the exchange during a later interview, Roumie offered a perspective that many found refreshing. That night wasn't about winning a debate or embarrassing Miss McCain. It was about demonstrating that in politics, as in life, the complete truth matters more than selective facts or performative outrage. The American people deserve representatives who respect them enough to do their homework and speak with substance rather than sound bites, and who seek unity over division. The Roumie-McCain exchange ultimately became more than a viral political moment. It evolved into a case study in the power of thorough preparation, factual command, and composed delivery in public discourse. Political consultants from both parties regularly referenced it when training candidates, often with the same advice. Know your own record cold, research your opponents thoroughly, and always be prepared for the conversation to go in unexpected, factual directions. And remember, civility and a commitment to truth can be far more devastating than anger. For viewers who witnessed it live, the town hall offered a dramatic illustration that in politics, as in any pursuit of truth, the most powerful weapon remains the same: irrefutable facts presented by someone prepared to use them effectively and thoughtfully. If you found this breakdown of political strategy and communication valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis of today's most significant political moments. The battle for America's future happens one conversation at a time, and understanding these dynamics makes all of us more informed citizens and voters. We'll see you in our next video, where we'll examine another pivotal political confrontation that changed the national conversation.